afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Donna Marie Collins. I am the hearing examiner that will be presiding over this afternoon's hearing. We have a request, a special exception request for a communication tower on McGregor Boulevard. The details of this request will be explained during the applicant's presentation. My job as the hearing examiner is to accept testimony and evidence and to prepare a final decision granting or denying the request. If I approve the request, I can attach conditions to the approval to address issues such as compatibility recommended by staff. The planner that prepared the staff report in this case has a recommendation of approval, but we still have to have this hearing to accept testimony and evidence and to hear any information from members of the public that they feel will clarify this request. The order of the presentation will be as follows. The applicant's representatives, those are the people that are requesting to install the communication tower on this property. They will go first. Their testimony may include more than one witness. At the conclusion of their presentation, the county planner that prepared the staff report recommending approval will also make a presentation. At the conclusion of their presentation, I will open up the floor to members of the public. If you are here from the public and you do not wish to speak, that's fine. Fill out one of the public participation forms and we will make sure that you receive an email copy of my decision in this case. But if you would like to speak, at this time will be your opportunity to do so. We invite you to come testify at the podium. We will have an aerial map of the area on the screen. If you can indicate to us where you live in relationship to the property, that can be helpful for putting your remarks into context. Once you're at the podium, you can speak as long as you wish to speak. You may ask any questions you wish to ask. At the conclusion of public input, we will go back to the parties and they will respond to any questions raised during the public input portion. And then they will make some concluding remarks and we will close the hearing. My final decision in this case will be issued within a week or two following this hearing. If you provided us with an email address, you will receive a copy of my decision via email. All testimony and evidence that I accept during these hearings must be under oath. Therefore, I am going to administer the oath to everyone in the room that intends to speak on the record. Do you swear or affirm the testimony and evidence you enter into the record will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you. We're ready to begin.
Madam Hearing Officer, good afternoon. I am Matt Tenaya John on behalf of Diamond Communications LLC and Verizon Wireless, 935 Main Street, Suite C4, Safety Harbor, Florida 34695. I have taken an oath. Before I proceed today, I would like to give you a paper copy of my PowerPoint presentations, and I would respectfully request that you receive them as Applicant's Exhibit 1.
Okay, thank you.
There are two identical copies. One for the record and one for your notation.
Okay, thank you. Just give me one moment to mark them, and then you can begin. You may begin.
Thank you. As I said, I am Matt Tenaya John, and I come before you today with staff recommendation of approval for a special exception to construct a 120-foot tall monopole-style communication tower and support facility on strap 3645-23-L as in Lima 3-00021-0010. The property is developed as the Peace Lutheran Church with a parking lot and indigenous vegetation preserve. The monopole will be located in the northeast portion of the parent parcel, tucked up against the church building. In all maps I show you today, up will be north unless I state otherwise. So this is an aerial showing the parent parcel with a magenta outline, which it's that magenta triangle. Cayenne, my apologies, cayenne, light blue. And I'm pointing at it with the laser pointer. Relative to the area around it. So you can see McGregor Boulevard passing diagonally through the area. That's the yellow line. You can also see Summerlin Road further off to the east, and the Caloosahatchee River up to the north. It is the blue area. So this parent parcel is split zoned, community commercial and MH3 with a future land use designation of suburban. CC places it in one of the higher ranking categories for communication towers under your land development code. I have applied an orange arrow to the PowerPoint presentation just to show where the parent parcel is. The property also possesses a future land use designation of suburban. The monopole is allowable on this parcel subject to special exception review, and Diamond exceeds all of the design standards under the code. I'm not asking for any variances. The one thing that I am requesting a bit of a waiver on is to be allowed to plant the vegetation that would normally be planted on the south and west sides of the equipment compound down to the south of the church building itself. So instead of placing the plants, and I will show you further as I move in between the church building and the compound fence where it would obstruct the church's movement and serve to buffer it from essentially no one in the public eye. These will now be enhancing the church's presentation from McGregor Road. This is a closer aerial, and you can see McGregor Boulevard. Of course, the parent parcel is outlined in that light blue, and you can also see Thornton Road heading off to the north, and the nearest road immediately to the north of us is Hibiscus Drive. So when we look at the layout of the parent parcel, let me get a little bit closer. This is your zoning map from, I'm going to call it Lee Spins, but it's not called that anymore, your county GIS system, showing the southern portion of the parent parcel as community commercial, and I apologize for the misalignment of some of the line work on here. Anyways, you have CC zoning for most of the parent parcel, and then up on the northern portion is the MH zoning. So the church building exists immediately to the south and west of the tower site, and I'll actually run through your future land use map showing suburban future land use designation. And now I will move, actually, I'm sorry, I'm changing my mind. I was just changing my mind on whether I wanted to show you specific line work before I go into my discussion. So just the general layout, the church building exists immediately to the south and west of the tower site. Indigenous vegetation preserve exists to the east. Mature landscaping vegetation exists to the north. Of course, you have mature trees scattered throughout the area that help break up the view sheds. This is an example of a monopole style communication tower. So when I discuss a monopole, it is a type of tower structure that has a single support pole with no guy wires or ironwork supporting it on the outside. It does have external antennas at the top, and that is in order to allow adequate space and air circulation for the equipment that will be up there. This monopole will have a dull gray finish and will be completely dark at night. Just circling around now to eagle's nests and waterbird nesting. The nearest eagle's nest is 0.61 miles away, meeting the requirements of your code. And the nearest waterbird nesting colonies are 3.48 miles to the south and 14 miles to the southeast. And I am showing you sheets C8, C8.1, and C8.2 from the plan set on file. All right, so now just to circle back to my description of the built environment. I'm showing you sheet C0 from the plans that are on file. You can see the site plan line work overlaid on an aerial of the parent parcel. You'll notice that there's a square inside of a rectangle. The square represents the equipment area, and I will have other sheets showing closer views. Down in the lower left-hand corner, and this will become more clear with additional views, is the monopole structure. So it's been sited within the equipment compound as far away from the residential to the north as possible and as close to the church building as possible. You can see.
Excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
If I can interrupt. Can you show me with the laser what is the least area?
Yes, ma'am. So the least area is right in here, this square.
All right.
The rectangle around it
Yes,
is the landscape buffer,
I see. Thank you.
and that's under control of
Thank you for
Diamond.
clarifying that. So the landscape buffer is outside the lease area?
I can deep dive into the sketch on file just to
Continue with your presentation. If I have questions at the end, I'll ask them.
understood. Additionally, Diamond does possess the rights to control and maintain the landscaping. So they're essentially in non-exclusive landscape easements when they are outside of the actual lease area. So to the north, we have open space on the parent parcel, and then we have Hibiscus Drive, and then we have residential property. To the south is the church building, then McGregor Boulevard, and then on the other side are residential uses. To the east are the Indigenous Preserve, and that's shown by the area with the angular hashing on it. And then you have McGregor Boulevard and residential uses. And to the west is the church building's parking lot, and then multifamily residential uses. I've applied an orange arrow to the location of the monopole. I'm now showing sheet C0.1, which is sheet C0 with the background clutter of the aerial removed, just to show the line work by itself.
So what is okay, so the angular hashing is the Indigenous Preserve there?
Correct. All of this line work matches up with sheet C0. So again, and let me go
So
to
the building basically is going to wrap around this little compound here.
Correct. And right now I am showing with the laser pointer, I am outlining the shape of the building, which is roughly an L. And now I am basically using the laser pointer to draw a circle around the Indigenous Preserve area. All right. So your code's requirement for setbacks and therefore also your separation from neighboring uses such as the residential to the north is 100% tower height. The monopole actually meets and exceeds the letter of the code and the spirit. So to the north, the monopole provides 188 feet of separation, just speaking in spirit at this time, from the nearest residential structure. So that's roughly 1.5 times tower height. To the south, you have 271 feet to the nearest residential, 2.25 times. And to the west, 504 feet, 4.2 times residential. Your code measures relative to property lines. This is just speaking in spirit of separations. Again, circling back to the actual separation from the property lines, we meet or exceed that, and the setbacks are shown on sheet C0.1. The north setback is 129 feet. The southeast setback, or McGregor Road setback, is 136 feet 5 inches. The west setback is 440 feet 2 inches. And the northeast setback, the setback to a privately owned parcel, which I am now circling in the northeast corner of the parent parcel, so this is a separately owned residential property, is 123 feet 8 inches, and that's the property line. Additionally, the monopole employs fall zone technology, so in the unlikely event of structural failure, it'll fold over upon itself and be contained within a 60-foot radius on the parent parcel, and that is depicted by a circle that is shown on sheet C0.1. This is a closer view of the site plan line work showing from sheet C1.1. And again, you can see McGregor Boulevard in the south, in the lower right-hand corner. Thornton is on the right-hand or east side. Hibiscus runs immediately to the north. You can see the preserve line work with the angular hashing. You can see the church building wrapping around to the west and the south. You can see the square area for the equipment compound, a circle for the monopole, and then you can see the landscape buffer area outside of that. The driveway will extend north and connect to Hibiscus Boulevard, or Hibiscus Drive.
So this is the access drive to service the tower?
Correct, and that will be completely isolated from the church's vehicular movement areas. It will be accessible only to technicians, and the typical trip generation is 1 trip per carrier per month, usually in a pickup truck sized vehicle. I speak in terms of typical because it's often less. And I've applied an orange arrow to the location of the monopole again on this sheet. This is sheet C1. It's that close-up view without the aerial behind it. And I've applied an orange arrow to it as well. This is sheet C2, just to show what's going on inside the fenced equipment compound. So there will be the code-required fencing with locked gate. And inside that will be a gravel equipment compound with essentially concrete pads with traffic cabinet-sized control cabinets that have the computers that process the data from the antennas.
How did you describe the size?
They're roughly equivalent to that of a traffic signal control cabinet. Because this is part of the E911 system, Verizon is intending to place a sound dampened, noise ordinance compliant generator, so that way it will provide telecom connection during power outages. The red arrow points to Verizon's lease area. And then the monopole is also provisioned to be shared in the future. So let's say AT&T or T-Mobile needs to resolve a gap in service in the area like Verizon is now. Your code encourages sharing communication towers to the point where we had to provide information showing that there's no towers or tall structures in the search area available. That is important to your code because it reduces the overall need for communication towers in the county. So perhaps up north, my example would be, say, in Atlanta, there are towers that were built before the days of sharing, and you could end up with 2, 3, or 4 towers side by side on the same property, creating what is colloquially called tower farms. Your code is designed to avoid that by requiring tower sharing. Diamond will make the monopole available at market rates, and there is an affidavit to that extent in the record. This is a sheet C7 showing the elevation of the monopole. And it's 120 feet to top of steel, 124 feet to top of lightning rod. And Verizon will be located at the top of the monopole with its antenna center line at 115 feet above ground level. So this is only the height that is necessary and nothing more. RF coverage works much like the lights in this room. They have to be spread out to create network coverage of an area. And the closer you were to bring them to the floor, the smaller portion of the floor they would cover. So if you were to shorten the height of the tower, you would decrease its footprint and increase the need for additional towers in the area. I've applied a red arrow to Verizon's co-location, and just as in the compound, the monopole itself is designed for sharing. So up to 3 additional communication providers can co-locate upon the monopole. This will have that dull gray finish, and it will also have the code required taping for your mosquito control to review, or mosquito control services. Now, just running you through the photo simulations and balloon tests. We provided photo simulations that were based on modeling and, of course, balloon tests to compare them to. And these are in the record for your review afterwards in the order. The balloon test was held with public notice in accordance with your code and was additionally stabilized over and above the requirements of the code by a crane to help keep the balloon from drifting to ensure accuracy. I've applied an orange dot to the location of the monopole. This is an aerial from the photo simulations on file, and it corresponds to the other aerials that I've shown you today. I have also applied purple dots to the various photo simulation balloon test vantage points. The first view is from Hibiscus Drive looking southwest, and as you can see, while there is visibility for the monopole, the base of the monopole is heavily obscured by the landscape buffer in there, and you can see those palm trees in the foreground that are along the property line. And you can also see the intervening power lines. The next view is from McGregor Boulevard and Thornton Road, showing the upper 2/3 of the monopole visible, and of course showing power lines in the foreground. You can see how from this distance it starts to come down into context. This is the view from McGregor Boulevard and Mandalay Bay Drive. The base of the monopole is obscured in this direction. This is the view from Windward Way Circle looking east. You can see the view from Summerwood Drive. The monopole is not visible. This is the view from Palm Drive and Croton Drive. And you can see the monopole in the background. And at this distance, it scales down into other objects in the view shed, such as those power lines there and the palm trees that are alongside it. This is the view from Paseto Lane. And so we had to find a break in the trees for this. And you can see the balloon test over here on the right. And then finally, Chance Way looking north. And you can see the monopole in the background, but only the upper quarter of it. And you can see that it scales down to other objects in the viewshed, such as the power lines. So I will be showing you a copy of the RF package that is actually an earlier version showing a larger search ring than the final refined search ring. That's because these communication towers take a couple of years of evolution. But the reason I'm showing you this is because that informed the site acquisition work. So when we say that we performed the work, we were actually looking at a broader area than the final acceptable range. So I'm showing you a map of the existing sites for Verizon Wireless. And again, you can see the Caloosahatchee River to the north. You can see McGregor Boulevard angling to the south. You can see Summerlin Road just as major points of anchoring for dead reckoning. The red markers are existing Verizon towers. And Verizon is on essentially all of the communication towers in the area, except for one that is located to the east next to what's known as Verizon Site 4. The site that is called Verizon Site 4 on this map currently is incapable of reaching far enough to resolve the gap area, and that just goes to the limits of RF propagation as shown on the maps you will see shortly. So that communication tower, which is essentially alongside of it, would meet the same limits of physics where it would not be able to reach in. There are no tall structures in the area. When I say tall structures, I mean structures of adequate height for Verizon's antenna mount. So this was the initial larger search ring. And you can see it runs from north of Iona Road to Kelly Road and west of San Carlos to Candlewood Drive. It's highlighted in red. And the vast majority of it is residential. You'll also
So anywhere within this area, siting a tower would have achieved.
RF package, which is shown on the staff report.
Okay.
But the general idea of a search ring is that if you can provide the deployment that is proposed on the monopole at the height that's proposed on the monopole within the search area, we can resolve the gap adequately.
So in theory, this is like an area of diminished service for Verizon right now.
Correct.
And then the tower will address that, raise the level of service in that area.
Correct.
And it will receive signals from other towers. There'll be that handoff so that there won't be that diminishment in service.
Correct.
Okay. So then do other carriers experience that same shortfall in coverage because of the location of the existing towers in the area?
As someone who has practiced zoning and land use law since 2013 and has been in communication towers since then, and I even grew up in a radio station back when I was a child, Oldies 106 out of City Island in Sarasota. But from my experience in the telecom industry, yes, there's some variances between the different carriers based upon the individual frequencies they're licensed in each market. So they don't all have the same frequency across the US. They have different frequencies on their market areas, and they obviously don't have the same frequencies. AT&T has a different frequency than Verizon because they can't overlap.
I'm just thinking in terms of the likelihood that there would be other carriers.
I would expect Yes. So, and I apologize for giving you a $5 answer to a $1 question. While there is going to be some variance in the actual coverage footprint between carriers, I would expect the other carriers to have a gap in this area as well.
So the initial search ring was larger, and then that reduced over time with further study. That's
Correct.
where we left off.
Further study and upgrades, yes.
Proceed.
All right. So the surrounding communication towers range from 1 mile to the southwest to 5 miles away to the northwest. And these towers are the nearest ones. Not all of them are reaching into the area to try to provide service. What you're seeing is, but they are the closest ones in each direction. And you can kind of think of this like if you were to try to light a room, and let's say we disconnected the lights from one of the several lights in this room. The area where you disconnected the light would get darker. You'd still get some light from the surrounding lights reaching that portion of the room, but it may not be bright enough for you to read. And that's the fundamental concept behind a cell phone, essentially. It needs a strong enough signal to be able to maintain its connection with the communication towers. So it might pick up some signal, but that doesn't mean that it's usable. So I'm now showing a map, just showing Verizon's current coverage in the area. In this map, the sites are shown with red deltas, and they all, or red arrows, and they all correspond to the map that I showed you before. And in this map, areas that are green have a signal strength that is strong enough for the devices to maintain stable two-way communication, whether you are in your front yard or you're inside a building. In the red areas, you have something less than that. So this is essentially shown as a threshold. There's other carriers who show additional levels of thresholds. This is the way Verizon, that Verizon maps it. What it doesn't show on a map, but is also a component to this, is something called capacity. And that functions just like how we think of concurrency of roads. Essentially, cellular companies are fighting the same battles that local governments fight with their roads. As more people move into the area, as more people move onto the cellular network, as we use the cellular network for more things, just like how we use our road network for more things. It used to just be going to and from your home or to work, but now you have delivery vehicles and such, so we use all our roads more. A similar trend has happened in cellular usage. So in addition to these towers having physical limitations, the ones that are able to reach over, such as Site 4, may also have capacity constraints. So adding this monopole, which I'll show in the next map, will resolve the raw coverage strength issue, the gap in service in the area, but it will also free up resources on the neighboring sites, such as 4, 5, and 6 on this map. So that way they can handle more traffic in their areas where they're serving as our usage of the network continues to grow. I'm now showing the proposed coverage map, and again, this is all on record. And you can see the Iona site is called as proposed. And so essentially, from a location on McGregor Boulevard, they're able to reach up into the residential areas off to the north and the west. So the idea is essentially try to stay out of the more densely residential areas, stay as close as you can to the areas where you would expect a communication tower, such as a major transportation corridor, such as McGregor Boulevard, but serve those areas within the limits of the physics that you are facing. And essentially, the coverage area, to overly simplify it, because I'm going to describe it with 4 points, but it's actually more like lobes essentially coming off the antennas in an almost pie triangular fashion. But essentially it runs from the shore of the Caloosahatchee River to the intersection with McGregor and Banyan Creek Drive, north to south. And then east to west, coverage runs from San Carlos Boulevard to Cook Road. And again, that is a very simple statement just to help place it on the map, its coverage footprint. Just moving into my housekeeping, Diamond has received an FAA determination of no hazard to air navigation. That's why this monopole will be completely dark at night. It's also been reviewed and approved by the Lee County Port Authority, the Lee County Mosquito Control District, Lee County Public Safety, and the Lee County Sheriff's Office. And all of those approvals are on record for your review. The monopole, as I said, will be completely dark at night.
Okay, so explain this taping to me then.
Yes. So in Lee County, you require a 3M reflective tape. And the idea is that the Lee County Mosquito Control District operates their aircraft with night vision goggles. And that reflective tape reflects the ambient light at enough of a level that with the night vision goggles, they're able to see the locations of the towers. And this is something your code requires of all communication towers in the
So
county.
to the naked eye, it's going to look black, dark, but
Correct.
to these pilots that wear these special goggles, they will be able to see the tower and, in theory, avoid it.
Correct.
Thank you.
This is a copy of the Mosquito Control District no objection letter. A copy of the Department of Public Safety's no objection letter. And that's where the taping requirement comes from. You can see it on the letter. A copy of the Sheriff's Office no objection letter. And a copy of the Port Authority's tall structures permit. And the FAA determination of no hazard to air navigation, which underpins all of those reviews and approvals. Lastly, before I conclude my presentation in chief, I would just like to bring the dais back to the public safety aspect. Of course, I very briefly touched on the fact that wireless devices are used in everyday life, whether it is a phone call or a Zoom meeting for work or a camera bringing Wi-Fi back from a property, a Wi-Fi feedback that you can access, a wireless feedback. But I think it shows most in 911 call statistics. So these are from the neighboring Collier County down to the south. And these are actually rather old statistics. Usage has increased since then. But just down the road in Collier County, in their year 2016, 2017, 78% of all 911 calls came from wireless devices. In 2017, 2018, 80% of all calls came from wireless devices. These are 911 calls. And I just provide that just to show how much personal communications has moved from the copper phone network to the wireless network and how this has turned into essentially infrastructure for our daily lives. With that, Diamond does respectfully request that the HEX grant approval of the monopole as depicted in the application and in staff's expert report. And we do incorporate staff's report, their analysis, and their proposed conditions of approval into my presentation by reference. We agree to all of staff's proposed conditions of approval. You have my analysis of your land development code in the record for your review. And that concludes my presentation. Of course, I reserve time for rebuttal as the process does provide me. And I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Earlier in your presentation, you had mentioned that the landscape buffering that normally would have been installed on the west and south perimeter of the lease area is going to be relocated elsewhere on the site. Can you spend a little time explaining to me where that's going and what that will consist of?
Absolutely. So this is Matt tonight, John again, and at this time I'm going to go in my PowerPoint presentation to sheets L1 through L3 of the landscape plan that is on file. And this is going to show the landscape buffers that will be around the base of the monopole, and also the landscape buffer that will be located at the south end of the church building. And that remote landscape buffer will be located within a maintenance easement. Diamond will be required to ensure survival as part of their special exception approval. So I'm showing you sheet L2, and this shows the code required plantings with your sable palms and your double hedgerow along the north and east sides. You can see the church building wrapping around as we have in our other plan sheets. Of course, you can also see the indigenous preserve off to the east with the hash marks, and you can see the line work for the compound in gray and the monopole. The double hedgerow and your code required sable palms. To the south of the church building, so this is sheet L3, the code required plantings, and they went with a greater variety of plantings for based upon what the church wanted, essentially on their front door step when you come into the property. But you can see the landscape buffer, and there's a variety of plantings there, including sable palms, and if you want, I can get the names pulled up. I apologize, I can't read the plant schedule as it's shown on there. But if you would like a deep dive, I can. Into the species.
Essentially, you're taking the planting materials that would have gone on those two sides of the lease area, and you're concentrating it on the south end of the church.
Correct. So Diamond won't be planting anything less than what they'd be required. They're just planting it in a different place that makes sense for this property. Because again, if it was provided at the compound fence, no one's going to see it. So it's not affecting, it's not causing, it's achieving the sound planning objective.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. And if you don't have anything further at this time, I'm going to go to staff's presentation.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Examiner. For your record, my name is Adam Mendez. I'm a principal planner with the Community Development Zoning Section. I do have two exhibits I'd like to submit into the record. One is the affidavit of publication that this public hearing was duly advertised in accordance with county and state law. And the second exhibit I do have is the PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you. If you hand those to me, I will mark them. The affidavit of publication is Staff Exhibit 2. Staff Exhibit 1 was the staff report. And the PowerPoint presentation is Staff Exhibit 3.
Thank you. I'd like to also introduce myself as an expert witness, or have been previously accepted as an expert witness with respect to the county's land development code and comprehensive plan. And so moving forward in this particular request, I want to emphasize that the special exception is only necessitated because of the height increase from 75 feet to 120 feet. That's the difference for which the special exception is actually required a tower up to 75 feet high could be permitted on this property without this public hearing process. So that's the difference here that we're really here to discuss and what those impacts are. This is the case map. Attached to the staff report is the zoning map. You can see different shades of colors which indicate different zoning districts. Commercial zoning districts have the same shade. It's kind of a lighter pink shade. And then you've got kind of a deeper pink shade for the mobile home district to the north, generally north of Hibiscus Drive. It's a mobile home subdivision. Some of the green and blue areas also indicate residential areas, but they're in either agricultural or residential zoning districts throughout the site. The Land Development Code contains quite a hefty section on the siting of new wireless communication facilities. And it leans towards requiring the applicant to provide a fair demonstration that there is no other alternative to the construction or placement of a new antenna supporting structure. And so through this exercise, through this application sufficiency process, which went over a year, which is typical of a cell tower, the applicant provided RF justification and the maps depicting the location of existing tall structures, which currently had Verizon antennas on them co-located, and as well as the RF propagation map, which helps to demonstrate the visual gap between the towers and where the service was lacking. And so in that process, staff also evaluates independently the lay of the land in the area, the topography, to evaluate any other tall structures or buildings which may or may not have been missed during this evaluation process. And I'll get to that with an oblique angled map to show you kind of the lay of the land and show you what is expected once you get out there and ground truth that area. But in order to minimize impacts of these facilities on districts, first and foremost in the Land Development Code, we're looking to demonstrate that there's no existing buildings or structures within that geographic search area, and that is this search ring here. This is the refined search ring. You saw the rectangular search ring. This was, I believe, to be the final search ring that was utilized, and that's what staff ultimately analyzed in the staff report before you as Exhibit 1 on the record. And so we found that, and then here's an oblique angle of the surrounding area. You can see the church here and the approximate location of the proposed cell tower. And if you look off in the distance, you will see some tall buildings along, and I say tall, I say these are 6, 7, and 8 stories tall residential condominium buildings in residential zoning districts along the river. They are approximately a mile away bird's flight. They're actually completely outside of the search ring. So if I go back to the previous slide, those were those buildings that you saw. Those are outside of the search ring, which goes actually towards the residential areas to the west here, and you can see just a pattern of 1- and 2-story residential structures with, I believe, a church further towards the center of the search ring, which does not have a building or structure on it that would be even remote comparison to the 120 feet that is sought for the coverage mark that Verizon is trying to hit in this area. This is the same search ring superimposed over the coverage map to demonstrate the correlation between the search ring and the unreliable service as indicated in the RF justification map. So in order to make a finding that the district impacts are minimized, the Land Development Code establishes a hierarchy of zoning districts for which they should be considered for the siting of new antenna supporting structures, or there should be a firm justification as to why they weren't utilized if they're bypassed. And so with that same search ring superimposed on the county zoning map, and I'll explain the different shades here in a second, you can see that there are 2 red shaded areas within the search ring, one of them being the subject property, which has a commercial zoning designation, actually has 2, CC and I believe CS. And there is a smaller commercial enclave in the same area and within the search ring on the south side of McGregor, a little further southwest. And so the other shades you'll see within the search ring, including the areas that have hatching, are all residential areas. They're either residentially zoned or they're agriculturally zoned but utilized for residential purposes. So in terms of where the search ring is and what districts lie within it, the commercial district is actually the second highest preferred district, only second to industrial. Industrial areas are shown on Pine Ridge Road approximately 2 miles away, which wouldn't meet the coverage objectives that the applicant is seeking, and as you've seen on the RF justification map, where the deficiency is. So the reasonable conclusion here is that within the search ring, the commercial property here was a sufficient site selection to minimize district impacts, and that's minimize impacts on other less intense districts, that is residential, agricultural, and so forth. So once we've kind of honed down to what's the most appropriate zoning designation, we look a little closer to the site attributes to minimize visual impacts. And you'll see that the kind of the common denominator in the language in the Land Development Code is to minimize. There is no effective way to screen cell phone tower infrastructure completely. So the Land Development Code recognizes these are efforts to minimize those, and those efforts include the monopole design as opposed to the lattice or guide wire design monopoles. They include panel-mounted antennas or the galvanized gray finish that's required so that the contrast between the sky and the tower is lessened. And then fencing, landscaping, and setback requirements. So the maximum height that could be permitted on the subject property, subject to either variance approval or relocating the tower on in a different area of the site, would be up to 149 feet. So the 120 feet height proposed is the minimum necessary for the applicant, have these demonstrated, to meet their coverage objectives, but it isn't exactly the highest that it could be on the site. So we're proposing 120 feet, and that would fit neatly actually in the corner of this tower, with the red dot indicating the location of the tower and the actual closest setback that Ms. Jan referenced was 120, I believe it was 123 feet, but I'm looking at a figure here that says 128, but I'll clarify. It certainly exceeds the requirement of 120 feet, which is equivalent to the tower. This is a closer look at the same compound plan where we've got the tower highlighted in blue. And you can see that within the actual boundary of the dashed line, there is adequate space for landscaping around the entire compound. It's really a function of whether or not that landscape is actually effectively providing any screening. So what happens is the church building actually becomes almost like an extension of the compound wall, if you will, and the landscaping is actually moved just on the opposite side of the wall so that the landscaping is visible instead of the building or the wall and the fence in this case. Some of the other unique attributes of this site that lend itself to compatibility and the appropriate siting for a tower is that is not only the building itself, but there is a development order recorded indigenous preserve on site. This compound is not impacting that preserve. It's actually situated, you could see with the hatching, even on this compound plan up here, it's just outside of the limitations of the indigenous preserve. In fact, I imagine that shaped the location of the compound, and that's this hatching here. You can see it comes right up to the limits of the 10-foot wide buffer on the east side of the compound. So what that does is it provides some assurance that this indigenous preserve with this tall mature vegetation is already in place, and it's going to provide sufficient screening from McGregor Boulevard and from other vantage points, as well as the building itself, which rises 15 to 20 feet above grade in some areas. It's going to provide substantial screening, which is the intent of the code. The criteria and findings in the staff report are reached in that, one, the The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, the goals, objectives, and policies. There's only one policy that is very specific to cell towers, and it's with respect to wood storks and other migratory birds. The applicant provided a full NEPA report, including the location of known wood stork colonies and other migratory birds. There's just a general understanding that non-guide wire, monopole shaft designs less than 170 feet without guy wires or lattice are generally accepted as safe for these species. But in addition to that, it is only 120 feet tall. So it's well under the threshold for which environmental concerns are reached with those particular species, and just generally with the broad strokes of the LEAP plan with respect to compatibility and things of that nature. The request has been found consistent in the staff report. The request was found consistent with preservation of environmentally critical and sensitive areas and natural resources. The area for which the compound is going to be sited is in an already disturbed area. It's cleared land. It's not part of the indigenous preserve. The indigenous preserve will remain intact. The tower will be compatible with existing and planned uses. We've gone through a series of checks and balances in the Land Development Code to identify that this is the most appropriate location given the search ring, given the area that needs to be serviced. It's going to place the tower in a commercial area outside of the residential zoning district, but still provide coverage to the residential area as population grows and as that capacity demand increases. The request will not be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to the public welfare for the same reason. This is the most appropriate location for this, we'll call it, piece of infrastructure, given the circumstances of the lay of the land and the topography of the area. And that the request will be in compliance with zoning regulations pertaining to the use. There are no variances that are requested with this application before you. At time of local development order, the applicant will have to comply with all of the standards, building code and development order standards for the request to actually be built. In addition to that, they'll have to comply with the zoning, any zoning conditions that are provided or attached to this request. Staff has recommended 4 conditions. 3 of them are very typical: site plan consistency, I'm sorry, let me catch up to myself real quick.
Okay, I had a clarification on the lease area. When I noticed the lease area attached as attachment B, it described it as 1,600 square feet. But then I found a legal description that showed 22. Can you clarify?
I believe that the compound is 40 by 40, the physical compound, which would be 1,600 square feet. The lease area is in order to accommodate the landscape buffering in the area around the fenced compound. It probably exceeds the 1,600 square foot fenced area. So the lease area seems to be larger than the compound area, and that's pretty normal of a cell tower request. So this is the area that's 1,600 square feet. It's the emboldened line here on this request. This is 1,600 square feet.
Is that the limits of the special exception?
No, the special exception actually exceeds those limits and goes actually beyond that. So there's a 15-foot distance from the fence compound to the north for the required 15-foot wide buffer. And then the buffers, the area around the fencing that's provided.
So, my problem or my challenge is the request is not to exceed 120 feet within a 1,600 square foot lease area.
Madam Hearing Officer, may I be heard?
Yes.
Provided in the records are a variety of legal descriptions and sketches. Essentially, the special exception itself is split up, or the area of effect, dependent on what aspects of the special exception are designed, right, is broken down into different legal descriptions. So you have a lease area. The compound area is 40 by 40, 1,600 square feet. That's the square that you see. But you also have an access easement that controls where the driveway can go as part of the special exception. So that way the driveway doesn't deviate. And then you also have landscape easements. And so you're seeing line work for all of that except the remote. On that screen right there, you're seeing line work for both the lease area and the different easements on that plan, with the one exception being the remote landscape buffer to the south, which is covered under the tag, which is hidden by that text call out. The area where the actual monopole would be located is restricted just to that 40 by 40 area and just to the location shown on the plans. So the special exception allows the monopole within the 40 by 40 lease area, but it also enables an access drive within the ingress-egress easement and landscape buffers within the landscape buffer easements.
Okay, but the legal description that's provided to me describes the lease area as 16, and then it lists these easements in addition. So when I prepare this decision, am I including the entire 4 pages of the legal, these
Those,
additional descriptions with the special exception?
that was the intention, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, flag this page. Let me see why. Okay, so Exhibit A to what I think is Attachment Q, the option and ground lease agreement. This is describing the area as 45 by 45, 2,025 square feet. I just want to make sure that we're describing the area accurately and including the information necessary so that there isn't a problem later.
And that was the memorandum of lease, attachment Q?
Yes.
And
Okay, and the ad does not specify the ground area. It speaks to the monopole, so it's not like we have a legal infirmity here. I just want clarification for the purposes of drafting my work here.
yes, ma'am. May I be heard?
Yeah.
So the memorandum of lease that is currently in the application is obviously the memorandum format of a larger lease that is not in the public record. The provisions of the lease require it to be amended to conform with the final zoning approval. So essentially, the way that this starts out is that they have a rough idea where they need to go, and the deal that they negotiate with the property owners, it's going to be here, right? Asterisk, subject to what the county makes us do and adjust. And once we have the use vested on the property, the lease is then amended to conform to the special exception. So it's essentially, it's an estimate that provides them actually a little more square footage than what is provided there for actual compound area. At one time they were trying to get something a little bit bigger for the equipment area, so they actually shrunk down.
All right, I just want to make sure all the exhibits are consistent. So that's attachment D, attachment E. attachment B is essentially the legal description.
Correct, with the supplementary exclusive landscape, non-exclusive landscape buffer easement legal descriptions.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Anything further?
Well, they're just to touch on the remaining criteria for the granting of a cell tower, which is specific to the wireless communication facilities, and that the applicant is not able to use existing communication facilities in the geographic search area. We've reached that conclusion. The applicant has agreed to rent and lease tower space to other carriers at a fair market value. They've executed a shared use lease agreement with the county. It's a form that's attached to the staff report. And the proposed antenna supporting structure will not be injurious to the surrounding area or reduce the quality of function of natural or man-made resources. And the last criteria, the applicant has agreed to implement all reasonable measures to mitigate the potential adverse impacts of structures in the facilities, which are those land development code provisions that they are not deviating from.
One of these other providers come in to co-locate on the tower. Do they require permitting from the county to do that?
Yes.
And do they produce at that time the shared use lease agreement or some documentation to show that they have permission from Verizon to locate on the tower?
Well, I don't ever get into the shared use agreement beyond that. I know that they can't discriminate. So if Verizon's got this tower, they can't say, you know what, we're competing with AT&T, so we're going to require their rent space on this tower to be 5 times as high as what it normally would be. I think that the county would have a means to enforce, at least potentially mediate that if that was an issue, but based on the attachment that they provided in this special exception, the condition of it, and the land development code itself, which stands
I was just
alone.
wondering, does it come into play with permitting? I understand you make it a requirement to construct the tower, but right now they have no one to co-locate. There's nothing, no agreements. So what happens?
Well, I think
How is that monitored, in other words?
as part of this process, I believe with the shared use agreement, they actually have to send notice out to the other carriers to let them know that they're building this tower and that they're going to have leasable space at fair market value. So all the other carriers are aware of this request. I'm not sure on the building permit front if there's an additional step to enforce the fair market value lease.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If that's all, I'm going to go to the public portion of the hearing.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to ask to take a 5-minute break, and I'll resume at 2:15. We are back on the record. We're going to resume with public input. I'm going to start with the sheets of paper I have here where people filled out public participation forms. However, if you didn't get a chance to fill out a form, you will still have an opportunity to speak because I will invite anyone else that wants to speak to speak. The first paper I have is Maureen Walt. Is that you? Did I pronounce your name right?
Yes.
Do you wish to speak? If you do, please come to the podium.
No, not at this time. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
thank you. I'm having trouble reading your handwriting, but I think it's Franklin Wayne? Warner, do you wish to speak, sir?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. John Woodring, would you like to speak, sir?
No, thank you.
Deborah and Michael Spirit Hawk? Yes, I'll take you one at a time, or if one of you is speaking on behalf of both.
Good afternoon. My name's Deborah Spearhawk. We live in the house. If you look straight across from where this is supposed to go in, it's the terracotta colored roof right there.
Is that the, are you pointing?
That's my home right there, and it's going in straight across from my home.
Okay.
And I've done a lot of research, and I'll give you one of the papers also. I gave them to some of the other people here. But in my research, I found a lot of different things with these. Starting with number one, it does lower the property value. And my research also found that 95% of homeowners, or home buyers rather, that are looking for a place to buy will not buy if it's that close to a cell phone tower. They just will not buy. And it does bring your property value down. I have a very nice home. And if we want to sell within the next year or two and can't sell, what is Verizon going to do about that if we can't sell our home because it's straight across from one of these towers? And also, in my research, I found the health dangers from one of those, and I have a list, and I'll give you a copy of this. But scientists have found that different cancers, prolonged, if you have around these for a long time, which of course all of us will be within a quarter mile, there's different types of cancer that it causes. Even people like that work at the church, they did, I'll show you this one. Hold on a second. They did a study, and it was performed in a real urban conditions with mobile phone base stations situated close to apartments. The overall results of this review show 3 types of effects by base station antennas on the health of the people: radio frequency sickness, RS, cancer, and changes in biochemical parameters. But there's a lot more things. If you're in close proximity, in constant close proximity, all the different things that it causes. And children, it causes autism, leukemia, brain tumors. This can, I mean, you know, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But they did a lot of different studies on people that were close to these. And we're going to be within 150 feet of this, or 200 feet. And it, like I said, it causes a lot of different health issues. And it does bring your property value down. And honestly,
They're working on the elevator. I'm going to see if she can get them to stop for 30 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. But anyway, some of the health dangers are poor concentration, fatigue and tiredness, dizziness, irritability, high pulse, nosebleeds, nausea, headache, stress, skin irritation, memory loss, high irregular pulse, chest squeeze, sleeping problems, diarrhea, stomach pain. That's just the simple things. But the serious conditions are so prolonged, what am I going to use? If you're on it for a long period of time, several types of cancer, eradication of brain cells, changes your DNA, which makes you more prone to cancer, infertility, and in children it can also cause autism, leukemia, and brain tumors. But there's a lot of different articles, if you look at different, like this one, different health agencies and stuff that do these studies, and these scientists have done these studies, and they show a lot of different dangers that these cause if you're living in close proximity. And like I said, we're straight across from there. We're about 150 feet from that thing. But that's what I wanted to say, and with that, I will let my husband come up and talk. Thank you for hearing me.
Is your husband also going to speak?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Michael Spirit Hawk. This is the, we wanted to enter this into, this is what you talked about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have something wrote out here, but when I listened to the gentleman and the lady here talk, and a lot of gobbledygook and stuff that you can't really see on a picture. What you need to do is you could come out to the site and actually see. You have to say, they say 40 feet area. Well, look at this room. What's this room? Maybe 30 by 40? So that's taking up that much room. There is not that much room if you look in this area. That looks big, but it isn't that big. So what they want to do right now, we live right across from this. This area in here, even though they say there's no birds and stuff in there, there's iguanas in there, there's raccoons in that area, there's squirrels. This is all real nice area. All this in here has all been nice. The church kept it nice here. They didn't put in parking and stuff. These lots here were actually lots that they bought so that nobody could build in right up against them. This house right here, they say is 120, no. If that tower came down, there's buildings right there. That 120-foot tower would come right down on their house. It looks nice at a distance picture like this, but it isn't that much room. We have our, from here, from our front porch to this area right here is about 20 feet. Okay? Then this lot here is probably 60 feet. Right now there's trees, ferns, so they want to put in a room there. They want to put this in once they cut that stuff down. And then you've seen the pictures of the tower, all right? And you've seen the pictures from our area, which they took the pictures from over in this area. But right here, we can see the top of the tower. We watched them with the balloon going in the air and the balloon blowing all over the place up there. It's just the light breezes once we get hurricanes and stuff like that. Indigenous area, I said, you're close to indigenous area. So why, when you have area that's across from it with across here, plus this whole area right here, this is their parking lot, this is, why couldn't they put it in this area? No, they want to go right back here because the church doesn't want to see it. See, we dealt with this with the church before because these people, they kicked their son out because he was doing drugs and stuff. And when the hurricane hit, they put tents right across from our house. And so they were selling drugs there. They could put their tents in their backyard. They wanted. It took me 2.5 months dealing with the church and code trying to get them out of there. And the church was saying, well, I said, well, move them over into the parking lot. No, because the congregation can see it. See, they're not going to be able to see that tower. And none of the congregation, they don't live in the area. All right? They work there, but they don't live there. And they aren't living in my house, which I spent 30 years to keep it like it is, and fighting code and everything. So I represent the families because all these families that live in these houses, there's 100 of them in there. Most of them are anywhere from 70 to 95 because I help a lot of them. I help with the trustee of the Iona Gardens. So I represent the families of the Iona Gardens, which couldn't make it up here. And a lot of them have went back. They have this now in May where most of the people and the trustees that I work under, they've all went back up north. I have lived here for 30 years. There are over 100 homes. Most of them are between 70 and over 90 years old. My neighbor's 90. The one next to us, there was a nice family. They moved out, the hurricane, in 2.5 years. They've spent 3 months trying to side there's rats. We have rats running around, rats living across the road. We've tried to get code to do something about it. We've got RVs. If you look at this property right here, that's an RV. And they were supposed to be out there in July. They've got illegal sewers run over. We had to smell sewers sewer smell because they drain their sewers and stuff. We can't get any code to do anything about it. Wink News has been called gesundheit. Code has, Wink News has come out and done several articles about the trash and the pile up and the rats running around and people not caring because of the rental places in there. Because years ago, I mean, we own our property in there, but the county took over the roads now to put in sewers so we could have sewer water, and they did away back in the mid-'80s. But I spent over 30 years, and wait a minute. I lost my space. Yeah, I'm 76 years old. I think it's like, okay. I worked for 30 years and helped people after hurricanes and zoning because most of them can't afford to put stuff in here. Zoning laws, which were put into place to protect our homes and our properties, have done a good job. But now they want to take, and they're saying, well, a tower is so high, well, they want to raise it even higher. And I talked to the people. I know a lot of these people, and I went and talked to them. They've got Verizon, they've got AT&T. Nobody has any problems with telephones in the area. I said, a lot of the gobbledygook that they've been feeding all this stuff, I've sat out there and listened to them. I says, well, I can make up data too if I had a lot of money to build up all this kind of stuff. But they've done a good job. The zoning laws were put there in place to protect our homes and stuff, and to keep these big buildings from growing up. And if you look, there's plenty of places that they could put this tower. And there's commercial properties and places where it wouldn't be seen and stuff as much, and wouldn't affect. Not that it's that I mind seeing it, but I don't want to see it the distance from. All right, so I have the distance from my front porch to you, from this wall to the road right there on Hibiscus. All right, then there's 60 feet, and then this is going to be right on the other side. Right now there's trees in there, there's a hedge that goes across there, and then they talk about putting stuff in on the south side of it. Well, on the south side of the church, and in between that, and I'm going, well, wait a minute, that's the north side of the church. So it's sitting up against the church. How are they going to put the stuff in between it? So, and then there's from the lot line, which there's a nice hedge right in there now, and we don't have to, we look across at looking at this indigenous area where we have squirrels and iguanas that even come over on our front porch and stuff. Well, is it going to affect all these animals? And red-tailed hawks and the eagles, they talk about no nest. I've seen them. We've been there for 30 years. Before they built this church in here, this was all woods. We had raccoons and possums. We had to live trap lots of possums, lots of raccoons out and move them over to safer areas, which we did. And eagles live in the area. They, right on the church over here, they see on the big cross that's over here. They've come over and land in my backyard. We have red-tailed hawks. We have rough-tailed hawks. We have owls. And maybe right now they're not nested in there, but they build the nests around there. And I know that the right over across right in here we now nest. And we have gobs of birds' nests in there. We have blue jays and cardinals and the mockingbirds and lots of doves. And there is the shorebirds that do come into the area, the egrets stuff. They're always in our backyard, which is this area right in here. They're always right in here, or in our front yard, or in this area in here. So it's going to affect these. And they tell you, and if you've watched news or anything, that holding that phone up to your ear, you're going to get it. Well, that's we're exposed to that all the time. Then, even stronger with this tower, and the people that we've talked to, they don't have any problem with cell tower problems in there. I mean, you can go all around. I work all over the neighborhood. I mean, I have AT&T right now, but in AT&T, I go, you clear over this. I don't have any trouble talking to people on phones. And the people that have Verizons, they don't have any trouble. So what are they gaining? And why couldn't they move it to if you drive down the ground, there's gobs of places they could put towers that aren't right 120 feet or 100 feet from somebody's property, and that would affect those people's properties and their health. But, you know, as usual, I'm one family, speaking for maybe 100 other ones, but, you know, what rights and how can you fight this stuff? I mean, but I thank you for listening to me, and I'm hoping that more members can side with the people that aren't getting paid to have this put on their property, which the church is. They get thousands of dollars to put it there. So if they just said, well, no, I don't want to affect my neighbors, then it wouldn't go in there. So, you know, how can we fight bureaucrats and big business and church? So, and I've tried to fight them before, so I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public present that would like to speak today? I will close public input. We're back to staff and the applicant to respond to public testimony and provide concluding remarks.
Matt tonight, John again for the record. Just before we proceed, I would like to submit into the record a copy of the Telecom Act of 1996, codified at 47 U.S.C.A. Section 332. Specifically, when you come down to Section C, B4, which states no local government or instrumentality thereof may regulate the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless facilities on the basis of environmental effects of radio frequency emissions to the extent such facilities comply with the Commission's regulations concerning such emissions. Verizon is FCC licensed as a carrier. So I would respectfully submit, and I apologize, I only have one copy of this, so I don't have a markup copy.
All right, so the section that you're drawing my attention to is...
Page 2,
Oh, I see.
highlighted.
You've highlighted it. Okay, thank you.
So I would respectfully submit that everything you've heard today regarding concerns about health effects or any type of RF effects on people, the environment, none of that is competent, substantial evidence for you to base your decision upon. I would also like to bring your attention, and I apologize I do not have copies of this, but I would ask you to take judicial notice of them. These are 2 court cases. The first one is Benjamina Nursery Farm, Inc. et al. Plaintiffs versus Miami-Dade County et al. Located at 170 F Sup 2D, page 1246. Specifically on page I apologize, I'm trying to switch back to reading in columns and I'm usually not. That
What year is the case?
I apologize. 2001. And it's at page 1253. The Southern District of Florida observes that in the state of Florida, lay opinion testimony is not competent, substantial evidence. And mere opposition to a property, what we call NIMBYism, is not competent substantial evidence for a decision to be based upon. And they cite a longstanding case in Florida case law, which is City of Apopka versus Orange County, 299 SO 2D 657 with a point cite to page 659, and that's the Florida 4th DCA 1974 as the original genesis of our case law that we do not, that lay opinion testimony does not amount to competent substantial evidence, and that opposition to a project, NIMBYism, opposition to change, is not competent substantial evidence. You did hear lay opinion on property values. Property values is not a specific requirement of your land development code, but if you do feel that you need to receive competent substantial evidence on property values, on whether this monopole would have an effect on property values in order for you to reach an order granting approval, despite your expert staff's analysis showing that we meet the requirements of your code, we would be willing to provide that. I would need to request a continuance, and then I would be able to provide that in the record.
If you want to provide it, that's your choice. Property values is not part of my review criteria under the Land Development Code or the Lee Plan, so I would be going outside the realm of my authority in evaluating this request to consider impact to property values. So this choice is yours alone.
Understood. All right. When you were discussing with staff about coordination and proof of the ability to co-locate on communication towers, for a moment it almost sounded like you were asking about what happens if the monopole is constructed but no one ever co-locates upon it.
No, I was
Okay.
specifically interested in what is the process for the co-location to occur, and is the county involved in the permitting of that?
Understood. Just for the benefit of those in the audience, your land development code does have a mechanism for removing communication towers that are no longer used, and even requires applicants to provide a surety bond to the county to cover the cost of removing the tower, the demolition, or to help offset that in the event, let's say that it wasn't Diamond, which is a national company, but it was just Two Guys LLC, Two Guys in a Tower LLC, and they went out of business and disappeared. There is provision there for your code for the county to remove the tower if it becomes unused and to offset that cost with a surety bond. And again, I apologize for taking up your afternoon with that, but I just wanted to also just suss that out, if only for the information of the audience. Co-location process is very simple and straightforward. The carrier applies for a building permit and proves that they have the right to, they provide authorization to be on that property. And usually they don't have to go as far as providing an entire lease. It's often just a sign off from the tower owner. So it's a very quick and painless process, and when an RF engineer is going through the process, they say we have a network deficiency, right? They start off by analyzing their existing network and saying, what can we do to adjust our existing deployments? Because that's the simplest and quickest way to provide service, to resolve the service issue to the public and their customers who they want to keep happy. and they have a mandate to provide reliable service, particularly E911 service too. After that, then they look for towers to co-locate upon, because instead of going through the review process, which Mr. Mendez mentioned, there was over a year of review there for just to get to this point. And we still have to go through limited development order and building permit review. They can just file.
Arduous process, I'm aware.
If there's an existing tower in the area, they sign a lease and they pull for a building permit, and in a couple of months they're up and running. So the actual environment, the regulatory environment, the market environment encourages the use of existing towers. Building a new tower is the last resort of a carrier. The maps that you saw today are based upon basically mathematical modeling for Verizon of RF propagation, giving their understanding of the topography and the vegetation in the area and the RF resistance of structures, also informed by their data that they collect from devices on the network. So they can't release that information because much of it is confidential and proprietary, but it informs the models that you see. They're not finger painting. This is the result of math. It's just a visual expression of the actual math, going back to, I'm thinking back to basically statistics class, when you go in and you can do modeling in large numbers. That's essentially what that is. You heard about the monopole, a statement that the monopole would somehow just fall over. That is incorrect. You have a fall zone letter in the record. It's signed and sealed by an engineer. And also at time of building permit, the monopole will be required to comply with the requirement that it meet a 60-foot fall zone radius requirement. And what that is a pre-engineered failure point. The monopole folds over upon itself and is contained within 60 feet on the parent property. This isn't new technology. The real-world example that I usually cite comes from 2004, Hurricane Charlie, when it went up Kings Highway. It went over I-75, and it took down all of those tall lampposts, and they were all folded over at the same height. That is fall zone technology in execution there being used, because again, you wouldn't want those tall lampposts to fall over on your national infrastructure grid that you use theoretically to move relief equipment or military equipment around. You heard a lot of frustrations, and you know that's very emotionally valid. You know, this area was hard struck by several hurricanes, just like how Tampa, my home, was struck by hurricanes last year. And that partly comes back to, you know, things can be frustrating, but from a legal perspective, we're looking at the Land Development Code. But one thing it did highlight overall is the need for a robust wireless network. And that's one thing that I see time and time again from jurisdictions across Florida and even up into Georgia. Hibiscus Drive, looking at the survey that is on file, is 50 feet wide, and that's in the record. So the distance that you got there, the distance that are shown on the plans, are all prepared and presented under sign and seal based upon a survey. So it really is 188 feet to the Spirit Hawk's house across the property. the monopole really does provide 100% tower height. So even if you were to throw out the proven concept of fall zone technology and say it'll fall over completely upon itself, even if it did, right, and if it just fell over like a tree did, it would be completely contained within that property, within the parent parcel. We do have a National Environmental Policy Act report on file. And again, as you also heard from staff, this isn't located within the indigenous preserve. So this is located on uplands that have been developed and cleared. So this will not affect the indigenous preserve. It doesn't create runoff or emissions that would affect the indigenous preserve, right? Any type of pollution or sewage. We meet your comprehensive plan policies for requirements of separations from eagles' nests and your waterbird wood stork nesting colonies. And those were provided as part of the NEPA report by biologists. And those nests are actually tracked on a state and federal level. So it's their locations of those active nests are known. Doesn't mean a bird can't. It doesn't mean that birds don't fly around and, over a territory, and we're fortunate to have them. I mean, I have eagles who, there's a cell tower behind my office, and I have eagles who come and perch on that at times. It's a great hunting vantage point. But the requirement is separation from nests, which we meet. I believe I've covered everything, but if I have missed anything, I am available for any questions that you may have. And just in case something were to be something in, and I do reserve time for a final remark if necessary, just so I can have the sandwich. Thank you.
Adam Mendez.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Examiner. For the record, Adam Mendez. I wanted to try my best at providing hopefully a simplified statement as to the first remarks that Attorney Jan placed on the record regarding the prohibition, the federal law that prohibits a local government from regulating EMF frequencies independent of the standards that are established at the FCC. And so basically what that means is this zoning process is not to consider what the safe and acceptable electronic magnetic frequency emissions are. This process is to deal with land use and zoning issues. It's the perhaps analogy I can use is if someone wanted to build a water plant here and someone came out and through the zoning process and we're concerned with the quality of water that's going to leave that new water plant. That's not a zoning issue. There's a different regulatory agency, in this case the FCC, that regulates the legal and health and known safety limits of EMF radiation. And to that extent, the federal government and even Florida law prohibits a local government from denying applications for the placement or construction or modification of wireless communication facilities based on concerns related to electromagnetic frequency emissions, specifically Florida Statute 365.172, subsection 13. And so, again, the scope is land development regulations, zoning issues, separations that are in the code. We're not permitted to evaluate the wireless provider's business decisions or customer demand or quality of service unless that's voluntarily provided by the provider. And that's what they did. They provided an RF propagation map. They provided what I'd see logical points of connection between the infrastructure that's surrounding the area and the gap that needs to be filled. I don't think that a carrier goes out and just meaninglessly spends money in an area if they can meet their coverage objectives in another way. So in summary, this isn't the venue for concerns with EMF radiation. That's a different regulator that you'd have to go to and seek information on if you have concerns over the legal limits on EMF radiation. And so another point I wanted to make is that this tower will be completely unlit. It's just going to have the taping, so it's not going to light up at night. The dimensions that were referenced in public input, those dimensions are 100% accurate. These are based on boundary survey data. There's GIS measurements that we can use that are very accurate. All these measurements that are on your site plans are true and accurate, and they can be ground truthed. And so with that, I conclude my remarks, and if you have any questions of me, I'm happy to answer them.
I don't have any further questions. I want to thank everyone. I felt well prepared for this hearing. I have already done a site visit in advance of the hearing, but I will circle back to the area to look one more time now that I'm better informed based on the PowerPoint information and hearing the testimony. And I will close the hearing. The record is not left open. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Zamer.
Can you ask a question?